Hi guys, welcome. Today's yin practice is designed to support your lower back. An area that for a lot of us we can experience whether just occasional discomfort or for some people it's a little bit more of an area of chronic tension. And so many different things can affect what's happening in our lower back that will really work this whole area of the pelvis and the low back to try and create some space and give you a little bit more ease and comfort there. So have whatever you've got for props. If you've got regular yoga props at home, or just grab some blankets and pillows and we'll use those for support. We're going to go ahead and get started in child's pose. And a couple of options here I invite you to play with. Knees together, so big toes together behind you, and then either knees together or knees wide apart. Those are likely just going to give you maybe a slight variation on whether you feel the pose a little bit more right into your low back or a little bit more into your hips. So try both, see what seems like the right one for you today. There's no right one, wrong one. And a couple options here, if you want a little bit more support behind your knees, you can slide a blanket or a pillow snuggled up behind your knees, especially if that deeper bend, the deeper flexion of the knees can be irritating as we're going to stay for a little bit of time. Good. And then let your forehead come down to your mat. You can even bring some support there if you want a block or a blanket underneath your forehead. That can feel nice if the mat's seeming really far away today. But take a moment to get yourself settled in and to really do this for all of the poses today because we spend a little time there in our yin practice. So find the support that you need, the props that you need, so you can really let go for those few minutes that we're there. And then once you're all settled in, just take a few fuller breaths. Sometimes it even feels good at the beginning of practice to take a couple full breaths in through your nose, out through your mouth. It can be a nice, simple way to release tension, stress from the day, and just let yourself settle into your practice, into this time for you. And just find the place where your breath feels steady, where it feels like there's an even balance of your inhale and your exhale. And let it get full without forcing your breath. And then see if you can let that attention to your breath just start to settle your mind, your thoughts. Some days that happens quickly, we drop right in. Some days it takes a little longer. Some days it's the whole practice of just reminding ourselves to come back to that rhythm and sound of our breath, to let our mind get a little quieter. So many different physical things can affect the health of our lower back. As we know, the body and mind are so connected that sometimes it's the stress of our days or things that are going on in our life, and that the low back might be our place of holding tension. And so we can address it from both sides of that, right? Physically creating space. And then also letting the mind get a little quieter and start to release that stress and tension. If that's also contributing to that discomfort or sensation in your low back. And so just give yourself a few more breaths here. And let it be slow and steady, in a rhythm that feels comforting to you. And then just move slowly between poses. Let yourself come forward to tabletop pose. And then stretch your right leg out behind you. Keep your toes down. Just rock back and forth a little bit to open up the backs of your knees. You're there for a few minutes, so nice to give them a little space. And then do the same on the left side. And then both knees down. From here, lift your hips, come to downward facing dog. And just use this as a transition as you walk your hands to the back of your mat. Okay, take your feet out at least hip width, and they can even come wider if that helps you feel more stable. You can also bend your knees here. That can create a little slack in your hamstrings, which sometimes can pull on the pelvis and then pull on the low back. It's all connected. The other thing you can do here is have some blocks for support. And so just giving you some of the variations to work with as you settle in, there's a lot of tension along that back line of your body. If you're feeling like you can let go of the ground or your blocks, you can bring your hands to opposite elbows. Maybe legs are straight, maybe keep the bend. Just play with what works best for you. But do let your head go ahead and hang heavy. It might even feel good in the first moment or so to sway a little bit side to side, or shake your head yes and no. While we're targeting the lower back, sometimes it's just nice to release that tension we can hold in neck and shoulders. And then maybe also in that way, then start to relieve some of the stress and tension that we hold in the lower back as well. And then when you're ready, settle into stillness. See if you can start to release the effort. And so you're not having to use a lot of muscle engagement to hold yourself here. Think more like you're just using the structure of your bones. And then let your head get even heavier. And think about the weight of our head, this 8 to 12 pounds that we carry around. As we fold in here and release that weight, it can act like traction along your spine. And in that way, creating a little bit more space in between the vertebra. Even just gravity as we walk around all day, it has that action of creating some compression on our spine. When there's compression on our spine, that can irritate the nerves that are running out from our low back. So one of the things that can be helpful is just giving us a little bit more space. And yin poses are great for that as we hang out here in the stillness. Find that slow, steady decompression to allow the tissues and the bones a little more space. And give yourself just a few more breaths here. And then release your hands, bend your knees, and then just nice and slow pedal out your legs so you can bend one side and then the other. Just a little bit of movement after the longer holds can feel like a nice release. All right, from here, take your feet out a little wider. Turn your toes out an inch or two, and then bend your knees, come down for a squat. It's a pretty deep knee bend. That child's pose is, think about that like a warm up for this one. Now, a few options here. Just like child's pose, you could slide a blanket or a pillow behind your knees. That again can create some space for that deeper support of the flexion. And if you're thinking like, squats don't work in my body today, or most days, another great variation, come to your back and hold behind your hamstrings. So it's that same shape without as much pressure on the joints or that deeper flexion of the knees. So wherever you're most comfortable, settle in. You can keep your hands down to your mat in front of you, or you can bring your hands together at your heart. And then let your chin move towards your chest, just to whatever place feels right for your neck. And take a few full breaths here. Come back to that attention, that awareness to your breath. And then just check into with the amount of sensation. So the longer we stay, sometimes the more we feel the sensation. And what we're looking for in our yin practice is that edge, that place where we can feel it, something's happening, and feel that stretching sensation, but there's no pain. Right? Move away from pain, give yourself more support, come out of the pose. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be comfortable. Right? Sometimes yin takes us right to that edge of sensation. And then we ask ourselves to soften a little bit more around that. And those places that we feel the sensation most are sometimes really good clues to what's happening in our bodies. That maybe a lot of sensation comes from one hip, one of the glutes. Sometimes it's the front of the thigh and the hip flexors up front. And so as we work through some different areas around hips and pelvis and low back today, let's notice, where does the sensation tend to be strongest? Do you notice any patterns? And then when you find those, you find a little bit more softness around it. And give yourself just a few more breaths here. And lift your hips. Walk your hands forward. And so you're back in down dog. And then kind of like what we did after that forward fold, just take a pedal of your knees. Let the backs of your knees open up again. And then go ahead, bring your knees down to your mat. So you might want to have a blanket or pillow nearby. We're going to be on our knees for this next pose. So if your knees get a little sensitive, or if you're on a harder wood floor like this, sometimes just a little padding underneath can feel really good. And then if you have blocks, have them up by the front of your mat, or a couple pillows can work well too. Okay, we'll start on the left side. So step your left foot forward and then bring both hands inside your left foot. Right, so you can even take your left foot out wide enough to give that the space there. Right, just check in with the amount of sensation there. That already might be like, whew, that's at my edge. You can also, if it feels right for you, pick up your right knee, slide it back a little bit more. That might bring in a little more sensation. This pose, I think, brings up a fair amount of sensation for a lot of us. So if that's you, you're not alone. And then you can just judge where you want to stay here for the next few minutes. Stay up here on palms. You can even give yourself more support. Right? So if you were to come up on blocks, that might ease sensation a little bit. Might. You can also come down to forearms on your blocks, or even forearms onto your mat if it feels like you have a good amount of range of motion here, where you're not pushing past that edge of sensation. And once you're all settled in, come back to your breath. Again, just find breaths that feel full and steady. And see if you can let your hips and pelvis settle forward down to your mat a little more. I find I know in my body when the sensation's a little stronger, I tend to hold back and resist. So notice if you can settle in, drop in. And then pinpoint where the sensation feels strongest. And can you bring a little breath to that area? That's always the place I feel like takes a bit of imagination because we know we're not literally breathing into the front of the hip or wherever the sensation is for you, the inner leg. But it's just about keeping our attention there, our awareness there. And instead of contracting against the sensation, to soften, to breathe with it. And again, if it's pain, back away. Give yourself more support, come out. And sometimes that's a fine line between where that edge is. Where is sensation? And where there's pain. I think that's a great thing about our practice is that it asks us to become really discerning about that. What's good sensation, stretch and opening, and where are we pushing too far? And give yourself a few more breaths for this first side. And just move slowly. Bring yourself back up onto your hands if you're not already. And then slide your hips back, straighten your front leg. That might allow the front of the hip crease there to soften back a little bit. And then just wiggle your hips a little side to side. Sometimes it's even after the pose that we feel that really good sensation of blood flow rushing back in. Okay, and then bend your your left knee, step your left knee all the way back to tabletop. Okay, from here, switch sides, right foot forward. Walk both hands inside your front foot. And then just check in here, where's the amount of sensation? There's a good chance it's different side to side. And then options here, stay here, slide your left knee back a little more. Oh, like I can feel a little more sensation there. And then choose the amount of support. So if that's hands down or hands to blocks, let's back up so you guys can see. Or come down onto forearms on your blocks or on your mat. Sometimes even play with one forearm down if it feels like you're starting to move in that direction, but two is too much. And know that the support that you take on this side might be really different from the first. And bring your attention back to your breath and to the sensation. Release the weight of your head if that feels okay for your neck. And let your hips soften down towards the ground. This area at the front of our hips, our hip flexors, psoas muscle runs through that area, which is one that gets talked about, I think, fairly often. This can, on a lot of us, get both tight and weak. If you sit a lot, the computer, your desk, that it gets compressed all day and doesn't get the chance to work. Also gets used every time that we bend our knee. Right? So when you're walking or biking, hiking, anything that brings your knee up towards your hip uses this muscle. And when this gets a little tight or a little weak, you can pull on the whole pelvis, the hip bones, and it can affect the tilt of our pelvis, which then can affect how much curve is in our lower back. And that in itself can either cause some strain, or if we can create some space there, maybe we can relieve some of that pressure on the low back. So even though that's where we feel it most, potentially in our low back, doesn't always mean it's where it's originating from. Kind of the puzzle of our bodies to try and figure out what's the place that's causing that domino effect throughout the body. It's all connected, which is great. But then we feel the effects of it when one thing starts to shift. All right, take a few more breaths here. And then again, just move slowly, come back up onto your hands if you're not there yet. Shift your hips back, straighten your front leg. You can set your blocks off to the side. And then maybe just wiggle your hips a little bit side to side, find a little ease there. And then come back to that tabletop position, hands and knees. Go ahead and slide your blanket off to the side. And if you have a bolster or a pillow, you'd have that nearby up at the front of your mat. A block or a blanket, if you don't have pillow or bolster, that can be helpful for support here too. And then we're going to come back to the left side. So step your left foot forward, but this time walk your left foot across to your right hand, and then let your knee come behind your left wrist, right? So pigeon pose or swan pose, we call this in yin. Right, some options for support: block or blanket underneath your left hip. This whole bolster can be a great setup for a lot of support underneath your whole pelvis. That can be really nice here. And for some of us, if this shape is feeling like that doesn't quite work for my knees or ankles or hips, you can also come laying down on your back and take this as a figure four position. Right? So it's that same position on the knee and the ankle and the hip, but we're not bearing weight on top of it. Right? So find the setup that works best for you. You know, back toes tucked under or flat, whatever feels more comfortable in your body. And then walk yourself forward. Come down to forearms. You can make a pillow with your hands, or even slide a block or a pillow underneath your forehead for a little bit more support there. And come back to breath. Check in with amount of sensation. And can you allow yourself to settle and soften around that? Sometimes just that active release of holding on, of the engagement, of the effort, of our muscles, can be a really nice way to soften the tension that we hold. I know sometimes I find that I don't even realize that I'm doing it, right? Shoulders are up in our ears, our jaw feels like it's clenching, just from that accumulated stress that we might have. And so we come into that edge and find the sensation, breathe, and then actively relax around it. We start to let go of that holding pattern in our bodies, conscious or unconscious that it is. See if we can find a place where that just feels like it melts away a little bit. Many of us tend to have, right, a particular place, whether it's shoulders or low back or jaw, where our attention tends to live. And yoga can be a great way to become aware of that. Where do we hold it? And how can we start to let it go? And take a few more breaths here. And then move slowly. Come back up onto your hands. Shift your hips back. You have a couple choices. You can come to tabletop, or you can come all the way back to down dog and stretch your left leg high and make some circles. You could also do this with your right knee down and just make a couple big circles. Sometimes even a few breaths in child's pose feels really nice after that. And then whenever you're ready, no hurry, move to the second side. So step your right foot forward and then walk your right foot over to your left. Get our rights and lefts going. And then right knee behind your right wrist. Choose the amount of support that feels good for this side. That's just a pillow under your hip, a block under your hip, or maybe that whole bolster or pillow there. And then walk yourself forward to forearms, maybe forehead to a block or another pillow. Give yourself a generous amount of support. That can make it a little easier to settle in. Just when our bodies feel supported, it might be more willing to let go. And come back to that attention to your breath. So each time after we change poses, change shapes in our bodies, we make that connection again. Simple, steady awareness. Just to keep our focus here and what's happening in your body. And to help to quiet the thoughts a little bit. And so you might notice that, right? Thoughts are going to drift off somewhere else. They do. Just use that breath as the anchor to keep coming back to. Just checking to see that you're at a right amount of sensation in your hip or wherever the sensation's happening for you. We're all built very differently and hold our bodies differently. So where one person feels the pose might be really different from where someone else does. But just knowing again that similar to the front of the hip, that this outer portion of the hip that we're targeting here can also really affect our lower back. And if there's instability or weakness, and then other muscles feel like they have to hold on a little bit tighter to compensate, like they're doing their job even more. So it can be really beneficial to work this whole area around the hips and pelvis to create a little more ease in your lower back. And take just a few more breaths here. And they're going to ease out like we've been doing. And set your props off to the side as you go. And then same either back to tabletop, to down dog, or even child's pose. If it feels good, make a few big circles with hip and knee. And then from here, come back down, have a seat. So if you have a blanket or even a throw pillow works really well for this from the couch. You're going to sit up on the edge of the throw pillow or the blanket. And this can really help to keep some of the natural curve in our low back. Right? So we do have that normal little bit of curve. And often when we sit down, right, this tends to happen and everything rounds in. So just by giving ourselves a little height, it helps the pelvis to tilt forward and keep some healthy curve in our lower back. Typically, unless we're doing yoga, we're not as adults often just sitting around on the floor. So good to give ourselves a little support in that way. Okay, from here, bring your left foot out to the side and tuck your right heel in towards your pubic bone. And just check in with where you're seated here. Does it feel like you can anchor back through your seat? Keep a little length through your spine. Not a huge amount of effort, but just so it doesn't feel like you're slumping. Okay. And then walk a hand on either side of your left leg. Right. Press down into your left fingertips to help draw your left ribs back. So we're going to create a little rotation, a twist in the spine, which can be really nice for creating that mobility through your spine and keeping that range of motion. And then a little forward fold from here. So options for support, for a nice amount of support. Bring your head to your bolster. You may not have a bolster. You can just rest your weight on your hands like this. If you have some different blocks and bolsters or pillows at home, you can also build a bench. And that can be really nice for support there. But just let yourself keep rolling your left ribs back as you fold forward so you get both of that, the twist and the forward fold. Let your left leg relax. Sometimes it's wanting to effort to hold us there. Find the softness. Come back to your breath. And then just notice where you feel sensation here. This pose might be, again, this might be different for everyone. Good at getting that space along the crest of the hip and this band of muscles and connective tissue that comes from the spine out towards the outer edge of your torso. But wherever you feel the sensation, bring attention to it. Bring breath to it. Notice if you can just let things drop in a little bit heavier. And in that, little by little, releasing the effort and the tension and that holding. And just finding a little more ease. And just keep bringing thoughts, busyness of mind, back to breath. And let go of those other things just for this little chunk of time. And take a few more breaths on this side. And slowly help yourself back up to center. And then just take a breath or two at center. It's nice after twist. I like to let our spine come back to neutral before we take that rotation, the twist to the other side. And you can bring whatever your prop setup situation is over to the other side and switch legs. So left heel in, right leg out long. Sit right up on the edge of your blanket or your pillow. And again, find just that little bit of length in the spine, not a huge amount of effort and holding, just not hunched over. Walk a hand on either side of your right leg. Press down through your right hand to draw your ribs back and just notice if that brings a little more twist in. And then you can stay right here. Rest your weight, there's a good tongue twister, to your hands. That can support the weight of your upper body right there. Or maybe build some support. Just see what works best for this side. Again, it might be different from the first. And then come forward. Find the place where you can settle in. Bring attention to breath. Notice sensation. Is it a place that feels sustainable, like you can hang out here for a few minutes? And just remember at any point, if you need to back out a little bit, give yourself more support, do that. And sometimes as it creates space in the pose, we feel like we can let go and settle in just a little bit more. And so listen to your body and how it shifts as we stay. Let the weight of your legs really settle down to the ground, to your mat. And just allow those places that are holding on to unwind. And know that just by being here, we're doing that. That we're allowing it to happen instead of forcing it to happen. Sometimes meeting that sensation, the tension with a little softness can be a really different perspective than always really trying to do something to it. I think our nature is sometimes to fix it, which is good. And sometimes just giving a little space and softness can go a long way too. And take just a few more breaths for this side. And then same thing, help yourself back up slowly. Take a couple of breaths here at center. Let your spine come back to neutral. And we're going to come all the way down onto our backs and set up for a supported back bend. So either have a block. A couple of throw pillows, like couch cushion throw pillows, work really well for this too. Anything that can help elevate your hips a little bit. So as you come down, bend your knees. Place your feet about hip width apart. And that's usually a good gauge if you can think about where your sitting bones are to line those up with your heels. And then lift your hips up, slide your block in. You can do the lowest setting to start. Sometimes that's nice. If it feels like you have a lot of mobility in your back, dial it up a notch, come to that middle setting. And then same, you can adjust with pillows. And so you can stack just one or a couple pillows up underneath your hips. And so one of the things to really pay attention to here is just that support is really up underneath your glutes and your hips and not in your lower back. And so it's down further than that. And then just let your arms rest by your sides. If it feels good, you can even close your eyes. Let the weight of your body really settle down onto the block or the pillows, whatever you have for support. And release any effort in your legs. And may even feel good here just to snuggle your shoulder blades a little bit more onto your back. And then let your shoulders rest back. And with all this space along the front of your body and this supported back bend, see if you can feel your breath move all the way to your belly. And so much of what we do in our day, especially if we spend a lot of time at our desk or at a computer, is this forward action. We're kind of hunched over, shoulders rounded, and then we get this strain and pull on our low back. And so a simple pose like this, you could even do, take a break during the day, do one, creates a lot more space along the front of your body. Allows some curve to come back to your lower back again. And even up just opens up a lot of space in your belly for breath. Think about the more contracted, compact our front body is, the less room there is to breathe. And when our breathing's off, our nervous system's off, and then that can affect our stress levels. So sometimes it's just the simple things that create space and ease stress. And let us breathe. And take just a few more breaths here. And then press into your feet, lift your hips just enough, slide your block out. Bring your hips down to your mat, and then take your feet wide. Let your knees rest together. Allow your lower back to settle down towards your mat. This pose can just be a nice way to bring some space again to the low back after the back bend. That gives it some curve, but also can give that little bit of compression through the vertebra. And then draw your knees into your chest. Bring your forehead up to your knees. Take a squeeze in. And with your exhale, let it go. So a few options here. And a lot of times we take Shavasana, this final resting pose, laid out flat. It's not always the most comfortable if you're having any discomfort in your low back. So you can come back here to where we were in that constructive rest pose. You could slide blocks or a blanket underneath your knees, and sometimes just that little bit of support brings some ease to your low back. And so just take a moment to set up a position that feels comfortable and supportive for you. Bring your hands by your sides or hands to your belly. And let your eyes close. This time in Shavasana really helps our bodies to integrate all the things that we did in the practice. So hoping we create new muscle memory, whether it's in that area of our low back or areas that you helped to release a little tension throughout the practice. Keep your awareness to your breath as we rest these last couple moments here in Shavasana. If you have longer and you want to stay and rest, do that. If you are ready to come out, reach your arms up overhead. Take a full stretch. As you exhale, bring your knees to your chest. Roll to your side. And then bring yourself all the way back up to sitting. Bring your hands to your heart. And take a bow in, head to heart. Into this time to take care of yourself, to release that stress and tension in body and mind. Thank you so much for sharing the practice. Namaste.